it's Alice, and today it's time to wrap up the books I read in the last part of August. The first book that I finished was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This is a literary historical fiction novel, and it's about these two identical twin sisters who grow up in this small southern black community, and they end up running away from this place at the age of 16, and eventually they sort of split paths. One of the twins ends up marrying this man and having a very dark-skinned child, and the other one ends up moving to California and passing for white. This book, which I'm sure you have seen, has been like everywhere for the past couple of months, and the hype has been a lot, and for once I actually feel like the book manages to live up to it. There are a lot of things going on in this book, and it explores a lot of different themes, and I very often feel like when I read a book that has so many things going on in it, I very easily feel like overwhelmed or like there wasn't enough room for everything. But this somehow manages to like take all of it and still be like readable and fascinating and eye-opening, and I felt like it treated its characters and the themes with great care. I think it's really interesting that we get to meet these sisters, and as we go along we also get to meet their daughters. I really enjoyed getting to know them and seeing their inner dialogue and their struggles, and I think that it's really clever that we get to see this story from all of these different perspectives, and I just felt like the characters in here were so beautifully crafted. I feel like it's really difficult to sort of summarize this book in any sort of substantial way, but I literally cannot say enough good things about this book. I think it's an excellent novel about race, identity, family, and belonging, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and it's easily one of the best books that I've read this year. I've actually watched quite a lot of booktube videos about this book, and I especially loved the videos that I watched by Bookish Realm and Bookish Babe, which I will link to in the description. If you want to hear more about this book and the sort of nuances of it, I feel like those videos were really good to watch. Next, we have got these 3 books, which I read for a video I did where I read books from 1991. And I will link to the video if you want to like hear a little bit more about the experience of reading these books. Be warned, that vlog was an absolute mess. I'm also going to try to review these pretty quickly because I talked about them so much in that video. The first book that I read for it was The Famished Road by Ben Okri. This is a magical realism novel, and it's set in Nigeria, and in it we meet Azaro, who is a spirit child who is constantly being pulled between the land of the living and the spirit world. So I picked this book up because it was a prize winner, which I understand doesn't necessarily mean anything, but when I read the blurb for this, I thought it sounded really intriguing. Sadly though, this was not for me, like in the slightest. I do like some things about this book. I like the setting, I like the cultural aspects of this book, and I like the idea of having a character constantly being torn between 2 different worlds. And this is clearly a very imaginative and creative book filled with like magic and things to wonder about. This is just way too long though, in my opinion, and it just ends up repeating itself over and over. And this main character of ours, he gets into all of these different situations and we have all of these different scenes, but it's kind of just the same thing over and over, and it doesn't really even make any difference. So for me, I don't really understand what the point of this is. I think that if this was like a 200-page novel, I would have liked it a lot more, but I don't know. This is just so weird, and there's way too much of it. It just goes completely overboard when it's like a 600-page book. I also did struggle a little bit with the writing style in this. Sometimes it's kind of confusing, sometimes it would just go on these weird, really boring tangents, and it has sort of a dreamlike and whimsical quality to it that I just don't think I like. Like, it doesn't capture my interest at all. So sadly, this was not a great read for me, and I ended up giving it 1 star. I do know some people really like this book though, so maybe it's just me who doesn't get it. I then read Jump and Other Stories by Nadine Gordimer, and this is a short story collection mostly set in South Africa, and it deals with a lot of different things, but the main themes are like human life and family. To be honest, I have very little to say about this book. It was just kind of an okay read for me, and I don't know, I just don't think this is the type of like short stories that I typically like. Some of the stories in here I thought were pretty alright, but I felt very meh about most of the stuff in here. I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna remember any of this in a few months' time, and I thought, you know, I didn't love the writing style. I thought the characters were kind of lacking, and some of the stories were a little bit confusing. So I don't really know. Not really my thing. So I give it a 2 out of 5 stars. The last book that I finished for that dumpster fire of a reading vlog was The Queen of the Timbre by Jane Gardam. This is a fiction novel. It's set in London, and it's about this woman who obsessively writes letters to her neighbor who has gone missing, and no one will like tell her what has actually happened to this woman that she's writing to. So when I picked this book up, I thought that the premise sounded really interesting and kind of mysterious, so I was pretty excited about it, but sadly didn't particularly love this one either. I thought this book was just kind of alright. I like that this book has like an unreliable narrator, I like that it's written in letters, and I like that we get to see this woman sort of slowly descending into madness. But I kind of feel like the main character is a lot more interesting in theory than she actually is to read about, and I found that I didn't really care about any of the characters or really anything that was going on in this. There's nothing really about this that I can pinpoint that I actively like disliked, but there's not a lot I can point to that I loved about this either, if you know what I mean. And I just didn't feel very invested in this. I didn't care really about the characters, and I very quickly caught on to what was happening. So when we got to sort of the reveal at the end, I thought it was kind of boring because I already sort of figured it out. So for me, this was just overall an okay read. So I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. After having read those 3 books, I mentioned this in the video as well. Because I didn't really like any of them, I felt kind of slumpy, and I felt like especially the Famished Road really took it out of me. Like, it was just not good. I didn't read anything for like 3-4 days, but then I picked up another book that I felt like would really get me back into the swing of things, and it did. And it was Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. This is a magical realism novel, and it's set in the small town in Massachusetts where we meet the Owens sisters, who lost their parents pretty early on in their life, so they're living with their aunts, and they are growing up as complete outsiders in this little town because everyone believes that their family are witches. This was a really enjoyable book, and not only am I very happy that I finally got around to this book, I also feel like I picked this book up at like the perfect time. I think what strikes me most about this book is the atmosphere, the magic, and how charming it feels, and I love the way that the lore is woven into the story and how we follow several generations of women and sisters. And I don't know, there's just something about this that makes me feel really nostalgic, and I felt like I could just sort of lean back and really get into it. And it sort of gives me the same feelings as watching shows like Charmed and Gilmore Girls. Like, I get the exact same feeling from this. I will say, I did think that the magic and the fact that these characters are witches was going to be a more prominent part of the story than it actually was. Like, for the most part, it sort of stays in the background. And I feel like that suits the story well, but I would have just loved to know more about it. And I especially would have loved to get to know the aunts in this, because they are very mysterious, and they are also sort of, for the most part, in the background, and we don't even learn their names until like the last 30 pages or something. And I would have loved like to hear their whole story. This was definitely a very enjoyable read for me though, and I really like the writing style, and I just like the whole thing. I do think it stays like mostly on surface level, but I didn't mind because I just felt like I could really lean back and just get invested and a little bit lost, and it was very, very enjoyable for me. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. By the way, no, I haven't seen the movie. I didn't realize until recently that there was a movie, but I looked up some trailers. And if you've seen trailers from like the late 90s and the early 2000s, you know what they're like. And I don't know, I watched like 3 different ones and all of them made it seem like this movie is like a romantic comedy, which I'm not into at all. But if you've seen it, tell me what it's like. Maybe I should watch it. Lastly, I finished So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo, and this is a nonfiction book that explores the current racial landscape and how to talk about race and racism. This was just excellent, and I have nothing but good things to say about it. It was so good. There is a reason so many people say this book is amazing. It's because it is. It breaks down a really complicated and complex issue into these smaller pieces, and then we take a look at each of these pieces, and the author sort of goes into what's going on, why it matters, and how to talk about it. And I just think it's incredibly well done. It's written in sort of a conversational-like style, so it's very easy to understand and get into, even if the subject matter is a little bit heavy. And there is a lot of information in here, but it doesn't feel overwhelming, which is just incredible. I think what makes this book so good is that it feels very grounded, and we get a lot of personal stories from the author while we're sort of building this bigger picture of this obviously being a structural problem and a really big one. It focuses a lot on education and conversation, and I think that's fantastic. I can't really say much more than that I would highly recommend this book. I think it could be beneficial and educational to literally anyone. And you know, even if you don't live in America, a lot of what's in here is sadly quite universal. So I think you could learn from this wherever you are and wherever you live, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Okay guys, those were all the books that I had to talk about today, and as usual, I would love to know what you guys have been reading lately, and I will see you soon.